Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rash's World. Today we have a special guest, Sheila Winter Wallace. She's joining us. How are you doing today, Sheila?
I'm doing great. Glad to be talking to you.
That's wonderful. So I have the toughest question first. How would you briefly describe yourself in any way you see fit? What would you say?
Oh, okay. How would I describe myself? Uh, a woman of great curiosity who has lived a really, really big life. Um, Wasted a lot of time worrying about it. Now that I'm older, I just carry on doing great work with other people, and that gives me it brings me life and it brings me a lot of stamina.
Mm-hmm.
So I I just work with other people. I've worked with women pretty much my whole life.
I think
So
curiosity
I
is.
don't know that answers your question, but
Oh, absolutely.
that's
There's no wrong
that's where
answer.
it is for
There's no
me.
wrong answer. But I love curiosity. I think that's hugely important too. Is it something that you discovered early on that you just like curious about others in the world, or is it something that developed over time? How would you say, how did that start off, your curiosity? What
No,
triggered it?
I think I've always been curious. I
Mhm.
there are story there. I grew up in Toronto, and I'm older, so I grew up in Toronto. I was born in 1946, so I'm dating myself right there when you hear that. And I had great curiosity. My mother was always trying to. I would just jump the banister on the veranda and go at 3. I think I had been hit by streetcars and 3 cars by the time I was 5,
Oh my God.
and I still lived to tell the
Oh my
tale.
God.
So I was
Different
flat out
times.
going.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
different times. Yeah, I'm sure I scared my mother out of a lot of years growth doing that. But yeah, the curiosity was there, always there.
Mhm.
I don't know that it was always. I don't know that it was always encouraged in the way that kids would probably like it to be encouraged.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, just through cultural conditioning
Mhm.
that happens, and family is pretty much the vehicle for that cultural conditioning.
Mhm.
But the curiosity has always been
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And so you're helping women mostly. What is it you do? Now, you're a spiritual healer and a coach, according to my information. And so, what do you do? How do you help them? And as well as, I'm interested in approaches and methods and so on. So let's talk about your work that you do with these women that you're helping.
I generally work with women who are they're pretty successful.
Hmm.
They don't think they are.
Hmm.
They think they think that they are frauds in some way. In other words, the imposter
Imposter
syndrome.
syndrome. Yeah, yeah. I was thinking of that. Yeah.
Um, um, they they work hard.
Hmm.
They look to improve themselves. Most of them are, I think, longing to create something very unique to themselves. Um, and a lot of them are just afraid to speak up. A lot of them are have great fears around money and what people are going to think about them. So generally speaking, it's somebody who's really, really looking to not be perfect, although most of them have that perfect
Drive, perhaps.
impediment.
Yeah.
Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
Most of them have that perfect impediment. Um, they're just looking to master their lives, and mastery doesn't mean perfect. It just means living life on their own terms, in their own way, with some joy and uh, without the responsibility necessarily that I think women generally take on for other people. It doesn't mean that they don't care. It doesn't mean that they won't help, but it means that sometimes uh, they end up feeling like they need to be the savior or the rescuer for everyone.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there comes a point when For me, um, I knew things really early in life, and I can remember saying to myself at age 11, out loud to myself, probably playing hopscotch outside, if I'm so brilliant, how come it's not working at school? Now, I wasn't hearing I was brilliant at home.
Mm-hmm.
The school had already decided I was too slow. So you got to define these things for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, School was not for me. Not that I didn't like aspects of it, all the creative music programs and all of that stuff. But I don't think I really, really started to excel until I got into nursing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I had a lot of fear around that because you're dealing with people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get it right. But at the same time, there was a massive curiosity that was happening. Mm-hmm. And so at one point, I had an instructor who had decided that I was too slow. You got to define these things for yourself. And she was walking down a hallway with a head nurse. And the head nurse said, someday I'm gonna hire that Sheila Winter. And the instructor said, what do you mean? I'm thinking that she should leave the program. And the head nurse said, and this head nurse held a lot of respect in the hospital. And the instructor said, whatever for, I'm thinking of suggesting that she leave. And the head nurse just said, look at all her patients. Every one of them is sound asleep and nobody else's are. So I think I just basically had the gift in my hands, and I've had the gift in my hands ever since. And I modeled my parents. They were self-employed. So eventually I took my nursing career and I studied cosmetology. I opened a retail store with a partner. We did that for 22 years. Well, I did it for probably about 15 or 16 years with her, and then bought her out, did that with her. Did that till 2006. And all that whole time I was going to school, I was studying everything I could possibly study in terms of different things that I thought would help people. And it wasn't until I met my mentor. So by that time, I had been, I guess I'd been studying cranial sacral work and Reiki and Huna and Chuika, which is a type of bone medicine, and process acupressure and applied kinesiology. And you name it, I had done all of it. And advanced levels of cranial sacral work and somato-emotional release. And the presupposition was, here's what normal looks like. You gotta map to normal. So you learn all these things to bring people into what you think normal is, but you don't even know what normal is yourself.
And who defines that? Yeah.
Who defines that? You have to define everything. Yeah. And then I stepped in a very, very broken time in my life. I stepped into my mentor's program room and I went, oh, all meaning is context dependent. Shift your perspective, and then all of a sudden, nothing's broken anymore. Mm-hmm. So now, what does that mean in terms of economies of scale for actually creating a business where you're doing something and somebody's paying you for a service, mm-hmm. and you don't hold them as fixable? Mm-hmm. Well, that was a life-changing event for me, and that process started for me 17 years ago, mm-hmm. and I never looked back. So there was something that happened over the years in that, where I actually started to understand, like really grok in myself what joy was. Again, you got to redefine it, because that word for most of my life had been suspect. People would talk about it and I would think, what are they talking about? Like, what is that? Does that mean happiness? Does that mean that? No, there was just something about everything's okay,
Mhm.
even when the shit's hitting the fan and if there's a mess everywhere,
Mhm.
it's all okay.
Yeah.
So there's a Hawaiian chant that has two lines in it that are generally spoken, and they go Eli Eli Tapu,
Mhm.
Eli Eli Noa, and Eli Eli Tapu means the God force that I am created this mess. It's time to change it. Eli Eli Noa. Noa means to clean up. Eli Eli Noa means I can change my mind. I can take a different route. I can take a different.
Yeah.
So, uh, yeah, that's I. It's a journey, and I'll probably be on this journey. I'm 78 years old, and I'll probably be on this journey until the day I decide it's time to go.
Mhm.
But that time hasn't come yet.
Absolutely. And I think I've been also going through various years with a feeling of mild satisfaction with things, but not joy. And so when you realize how much deeper you could go with things, and often it's a paradigm shift. So when it's some of the things I'd probably do exactly the same way, I would just feel differently about it. And that is a huge thing because then you realize you're worrying about things, fretting over things, and it's not worth it. I mean, everything is okay.
Mm,
And I think that really changed a lot of things that I would see. And I enjoy things much more where you
right.
don't feel that you have to prove yourself or that prove that you're not an imposter. And that kind of idea often blocks us. But we're all unique beings. And if we can really tap into that uniqueness, that's what we bring to the world, whatever that is in each of the cases. And I think that's hugely important to dive into and to explore.
The idiom "I am whole, I am unique, and I am essential to my world"
Hmm.
is one that I am not the author of that. My mentor is. It's an idiom that I think is worth hanging on to,
Hmm.
practicing, allowing yourself to consider, even when you don't think it's the truth. Let it rumble through the tissue as you take an inhale and an exhale,
Hmm.
and uh, try it on like a brand new garment, and then just let it get nice and worn. It's a good way to live. I think the problem for most of us, I once heard somebody say that religion is the politics of spirituality. That kind of worked for me because everybody's a spiritual
Hmm.
being. Don't they just often don't realize that, and I think they don't realize it because we have really had a mind share of there is a God out there and it's not you,
Right. Yeah.
and
And it's actually a God that's watching you, that's like punishing you, that's like
yeah,
rewarding you. So it's very tense. You get very paranoid about that. I feel like
right,
we don't feel that this God is on our side and wants the best for us often. We're just like feel like we're being judged, like the teacher or a parent and so on. So I think that's an issue because the love is missing, the connection and so on often.
well, by the same token, um, I think you have to define love for yourself.
Hmm.
Again, love can be construed as a four-letter word. It is literally a four-letter word, but
Hmm.
sometimes there have been some really powerful atrocities that have been committed in the name of it. And so, if another way that one might look at it is respect, integrity, and generosity of spirit.
Hmm.
So that's something that I keep in mind. It's a pretty common word in the vernacular. So um, what love might mean to one person is going to be something different. I think generally speaking, a lot of the people around that are interested in the things that I'm interested to have held it as the glue that holds, you know, the stuff behind the stuff that makes things work.
Mhm.
If 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 you know what I mean. There's uh, if you just think about the quantum field, so uh, somebody worth really listening to. There's some great people out there to listen to. Greg Braden is one of them. Dr. Bruce Lipton, who really had the quantum sciences of the body. Nassim Harriman, who is another one, a quantum physicist who actually now has the science of the signal that each one of us is. So he talks about protons and Plancks, but you know, when you go down, and I mean, I recently tried a meditation that he has developed for himself, and I actually did it in a moment. It was like I went into the smallest imaginable particle, and then I had become one with the void. So think of the void as the field where nothing is good, bad, right, or wrong.
Mhm. That's true.
And that's a hard one for people, but nothing is good, bad, right, or wrong, where the point of deconstruction is actually the point of creation. So you cannot go out and build a new garden without putting a hoe into the earth and upturning it. So, you know, you're destroying what was and you're recreating, you're laying the ground for that. So it means that everything is viable, everything is useful, everything has its essential meaning. And when you choose to stop the thing that keeps you disconnected, tapu means the thing that I literally use to disconnect from myself. That's what it, you know, Christian faith might call it the sin but that the sin is always intonated as bad. It's the thing that I use to distract myself from myself, to disassociate from myself and myself. So you want to come back online with the signal from self that you are. You need to change perspective. You need to change your mind. And so I'm saying you generally, but then when you actually allow for that shift, what you considered as incorrect or non-resourceful or not working for you has the chance to reconstruct itself, reactivate itself, recreate itself differently into something that is working for you in the moment. And
I like that.
it's all happening in a breath.
Hmm.
And that's, I would say, if you really want to claim the essence of who you are, allow the fullness of it into your tissue. And how you do that is inhaling and exhaling. The essence of who you are as a signal that is penetrating tissue is through the breath.
Hmm.
And no breath, no life. That's really how the Hawaiians talked about it. They called the missionaries Pales. Ha'ole means no breath. No breath, no life.
Hmm.
So, you know, the missionaries went to Hawaii to spread the gospel according to whatever. And the Hawaiians noticed that they weren't breathing. And that is that willingness, the first choice you ever make, that willingness to take a breath and own the truth of your experience in the moment. Like, oh my gosh, I don't like this. I'm really scared. I don't know what I'm going to do about this, but you got to own it for yourself.
Yes, that's important.
And if you can own it out loud,
Yeah.
that's pretty great. So that sometimes we're in groups and we hold back
Yeah.
We don't own our own fear, and then we just go with the group because, oh, they it'll be okay. They wouldn't do that. Well, then you find yourself in a mess. So
Mhm.
it's like taking that breath and exhaling and owning the truth of your experience, and then continuing to follow what's happening in the body,
Mhm.
taking another breath, because you are literally a wave of energy and information. You want it to move. So that move might look like tears. That might like a strong no, not doing that. It might look like, oh my gosh, I feel sick in my stomach that this is happening. Uh, Whatever it is, there's a massive wave of energy and information that can move. And if you let it ride on the breath, so the word Hawaii, that's what it means. Hawaii. I am the hot breath. Vai is water, means flow, and E is I am the God force. I
Oh,
am the
cool.
God force riding on the flow of my breath.
Oh, cool.
That's why Hawaii is paradise.
Mhm. Mhm.
And breathing is paradise. You ask anybody who hasn't been able to breathe, they know that breathing is paradise.
Yeah.
And it's what allows the essence of who you are to actually express through the body. The body you can't revel in the sensory cues that you have without that body. You're never going to die. The essence of who you are is never going to die, but the body's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, um, and I speak this way because, I don't think really, really got you can anybody can go out and create money, but you cannot create time.
Yeah.
So at 78 years old, I lived a big chunk of life. So, I might be around for another 20 years. I might not. The point I'm making is do not waste your time.
Yes. Yes.
Get on with it. Just whatever it is, because you're never going to get it wrong and you're never going to get it done. Just choose for yourself in the moment and move forward.
I'm just reminded of a Greg Lake song that has, and I'm paraphrasing, but it says, "You don't have to be well to be wealthy, but you have to be whole to be holy." And I really like that because I think it explains it quite well, and that's important
That's a
too.
good one.
Yeah, and so I think
A good one.
also what we're often blocking ourselves, I find, and there's also a lot of judgment. So as you were talking, I'm just remembering all the negative, quote unquote, negative experiences I've had. Those were the ones I learned the most. They shook me up, they woke me up, and I think when we prematurely judge something in a negative way and see it as a bad thing, there's actually we have to pause and again kind of listen to the experiences that we have, the body and the emotions that kind of come up and then learn from it and move on and not see it as necessarily something negative, but you can turn it into gold and not to be stuck in that toxic way of negativity of thinking like this is bad and then or seeing yourself as somebody who can't move on because of that, but just to overcome it in many ways. And I found those experiences were usually the best, and I thank the people who did that to me because
Yeah.
they taught me a lesson.
We can't create without engagement with other people.
Mhm.
I mean, I remember my mentor, Louise LeBrun, actually saying to me years ago, you wouldn't have to worry if you lived on a desert island all by yourself. You just make your own decisions.
Mhm.
You wouldn't be worried about anybody
Mhm.
else.
Mhm.
And I kind of chuckled. Well, and the same Harriman is the same thing. I just heard him recently on an Evan Carmichael podcast saying, if you weren't in creation with other people, you'd be bored out of your mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's useful to remember, and I really think this is the truth of it, that we are perceivers, we are projectors.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly projecting all the stuff I don't know about myself. And so the journey I'm on, the great curiosity allows me to find out more about myself. And I have to tell you, there's been lots of times when I didn't really like what I was finding out about myself. But, metaphors and patterns, those are the things that really work in my life. I metaphors allow me to take an abstract perspective.
Mhm. Mhm.
Perspectives can be broad or it can be narrow, and uh, depending on how you're thinking about your life. And I honestly think that the broader I can allow myself to go, the more int- the more intricacies in life I can discover. And that's where the patterns start to show up, especially when they're repeating patterns. So then the question doesn't become whether they're good, bad, right, or wrong. The question becomes, how's it working for me?
Mhm. Exactly.
And 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 if you can see that happening with the people you care about and say to them, here's what I noticed. Does that resonate with you?
Mhm.
And they'll tell you yes or no. You can trust that you don't have to be right about it. You can just tell them.
Mhm.
And they're going to say, they might get on the defensive, they might not, doesn't matter. It literally will cause them to go in because you've asked the question to, if they take a breath, they might raise their perspective and think, well, geez, is that true for me or not?
Uh-huh.
And own whether it is true for them or not. And it's like a key in the lock that opens up the possibility for more contemplation on their end so that they can ask the bigger questions of you. And you go back and forth like that. I think that's how great creations are made. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the issues is also that drive for perfection. The drive itself is probably okay, but like reaching perfection, I find that horrible. I think it's like that's bland. When you reach perfection, it's like what's next? What now? I think that's kind of like it's not really helping. We are not perfect beings, and we cannot really be, but that's fine. It's really that kind of process of again learning and not striving for something that's impossible to attain. And that's something I found when I try so hard to be as perfect as possible. That created a lot of unnecessary stress. Whereas when I relaxed, and I liked how you said, you be on the defensive or not, accept what I say or not, and be okay with it. And I think that's hugely important instead of really like being driven also by what others are thinking and having them like control or limit us in different ways. Being our own creators, speaking our own truth, and not being stopped or bothered by what others necessarily think or even say to us when it's something that we feel intensely about.
I had one of my instructors years ago said everything in life is an anchor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So an anchor is basically, other people would use the word trigger, other people would use a one-step stimulus response. Like a phobia would be a one-step stimulus response. But the idea that a stimulus always has an effect.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how things get. You think about Pavlov
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and Pavlov's dogs,
Mm-hmm.
stimulus response.
Yeah.
So everything in life is that.
And action
And
reaction,
then,
we have that
yeah,
term, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and things get coupled together.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they just need decoupling.
Yes.
And so the idea of perfect is like, who defines that? You
Uh-huh.
can only define that for yourself.
Yeah.
Um, who defines it? And what's the motivation behind it?
Yeah.
So a lot of people, I think, and so it brings up the question of self-worth and worthiness.
Mhm. That's it.
Good,
That's it.
good enough,
Mhm.
good enough.
Mhm.
And so often the striving for self-perfection is a genius strategy running uh, to move away from I'm not good enough.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when you can allow yourself to just take a breath and exhale and try that on for size, and you know, it gets so wired in over time because we're all expected to not be good enough. That's what drives the economy. We
Yes.
don't have enough. Just
Yeah.
any 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 currency it's going to, and I'm not talking financial currency here. I'm talking about currencies of of whatever in life you would call
Mhm.
a currency that would be a resource to you.
Mhm.
And these things get defiled,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so it's always a move away from the very thing that you're looking for.
Mhm.
But perfect is like that just becomes a big roadblock.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, a roadblock. I love that.
So
So one of
so I
yeah.
I think I just think that, you know, I mean, I've gone through a lot. I'm still finding areas. I'm still finding,
For sure.
I'm still finding areas. But what's happened for me is the judgments dropped out.
Yeah, that's it.
And
Yeah.
that and you know, most of us don't want to hear the judgments that come with it. It's like we've still got all these old gremlins on the back of our necks going, hey,
Yeah.
listen here, listen here.
Yeah.
And it's not true. It's an
No.
illusion.
No.
So uh, I can't stress enough stopping and taking a breath.
Mhm.
That is the thing that will save your life. Exhale.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Pausing,
there's a
really
need to,
pausing and looking at things too, instead of also immediately
right,
reacting. And I think that one thing that I don't like, I hear often, is be the best version of yourself. And I'm thinking, well, the best version is who I am truly. So that should be it.
right
Why do
now.
we want another
This is,
version? Yeah,
yeah, well, this is the best version of myself is who I am right in this moment.
that's it.
So, you know, it's kind of the same metaphor as going for an x-ray.
Huh.
And so the x-ray shows something up. And it's a snapshot of what's happening in the body in that moment.
Mhm.
But everybody then looks at the x-ray and says, well, that doesn't look right. So now they're going to focus on it and make it a thing. And so you're actually going to create the thing, even though if you took another perspective on it, because we do have that power. We just don't think we do, but we do have that power.
Mhm.
So if if somebody uh, has fear around that, and that fear is ingrained, that is part of the mind control that's been going on forever. Just be fearful.
Mhm.
If you know, COVID was one of those things
Mhm.
where how many people died of fear and not not what we were being isolated for. How many people died of isolation?
Mhm.
So that's a whole other story. I'm not going to specifically go there, but as a metaphor, it's really, really huge. That fear is a big driver. Buy it now, because if you don't buy it now, you're going to miss out. You know, do this now, do that now. Everybody's scrambling because of the fear. The best way to dissipate fear is stop and you exhale. And you do it again and again and again because it's going to take the body from a sympathetic response into a parasympathetic response.
And not to be
And when,
afraid of fear itself. And that's another thing that we often are. And
exactly,
it's that's important too.
exactly.
I'd like to talk about your technique that you use, somato emotional release. Could you briefly explain that here to wrap up here on this podcast? But what is the technique? What is involved? And I think that's something that would resonate with me.
Well, I developed something years ago called body spirit integration.
That's cool.
So um, I've kind of given myself that title, a body spirit integration specialist.
Mhm.
I I started out life as a nurse. I studied all kinds of modalities in order to uh, create assessments, create relaxation responses in the body, uh, primarily to get people through their pains. That's, physical pain, their emotional pain, their spiritual discomforts. And my first love has always been cranial sacral work and somato-emotional release. They interplay with each other. For me, they're one and the same. And for me, they're a great metaphor for the epiphany I had back in 1999 when I recognized that I had chosen science, Newtonian science, because that was safe. But my fascination had always been with the esoteric. And there came a day when I recognized that they were both one and the same thing. The only thing is that the esoteric or the spiritual was far more expansive. And so now with the great revelations around quantum physics, the Newtonian can fit into that. But you can't fit the quantum into the Newtonian. You can fit. So the modalities that I discovered are all fit into a bigger context that says I'm whole, I'm unique, and I'm essential to my world. So I developed this. I called my mentor probably about 15 years ago, and I said to her, people are coming to me for cranial sacral work. And I have such a plethora of tools and information and cross-referencing and connections. I said, they're getting off the table and they're saying to me, man, I've never had cranial sacral like this. And I told her, I said, I don't really know what to call it. Like, it was almost in the back of my head, I must be doing something wrong here. And she said, well, you could probably call it body-spirit integration. And I started to laugh. That just sounded like way woo-woo for me. I was a businesswoman. That was way woo-woo. But I went, I'm going to try that on. And then I said to her jokingly, well, as long as we don't call it IBS, irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah.
So I just started working with that. And people started coming. And I don't do 50-minute hours. I do 4 hour sessions, and they go fast because there's a whole pile of coaching. There's a whole pile coaching on perspective, not coaching on strategy about do this to get that done.
Exactly.
Much higher orders of thinking. Think about who and what you are. What do you want to create? And then intentionally working through intention so that they actually start creating the life they want over time. It's the process. So I talk to them about perspective, talk to them about context, I talk to them about process, and forget about the outcome, because if you are highly intentional and you are paying attention to the process, the outcome's going to happen anyway. It just might not happen the way you think it's going to happen. That is basically the program. And then a lot of the stuff that happens for people is stuff that is buried so deep, and a lot of it's pre-verbal. The only way to decode anything is through the body. So they get on the table, and I find all those spaces and places where they don't even know they're locked up, or that pain is residing. They become so inured to the discomfort of it, they don't even notice it anymore. And we wake it up. And as we wake it up,
we release it in a way, right?
Well, it's like the body literally digests it and metabolizes it. The way you would eat a banana, you have the digestive enzymes digest, metabolize,
Mm-hmm.
keep the building blocks, let go of the rest. Well, your breath does the same thing. Think of it as an enzyme.
Mm-hmm.
You come up, you feel a trigger of fear inside. You
Mm-hmm.
notice where it's firing off in the body.
Mm-hmm.
You soften the jaw, you
Mm-hmm.
soften the body. You take a breath and you let it flood. You just let that trigger just flood, disseminate through the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's gone.
Yeah.
And you do it again and again and again. And then what happens is you literally have to give up any story you had.
Mm-hmm.
All the stories that you ran about, it must be because I slept the wrong way, or it must be because I stood on my head,
Right. Right.
or, you know,
Yeah.
all those stories that you tell yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you end up giving them up because they're irrelevant. The
Mm-hmm.
only, I once had an instructor say to me, the only content and content worth knowing, there is no content and content worth knowing. Well, what he was saying was the only relevance to the story, to anything that you're experiencing in the body, is to leverage the genius behind it, so you can change the you can change the body, and
Mm-hmm.
as you're changing your body, because all matter, bodies, or things that look like intangibles, but you brought them, like you created a podcast for yourself. There was an intention, there was an
Mm-hmm.
idea, you created a podcast for yourself. Now you're actually engaging with people
Mm-hmm.
in a podcast. Can you put your hand on it? Maybe not,
Mm-hmm.
but the outcome still mapped to an intention, and how you got there uh, is was all part of a process. And I'm sure there were things that went this way. No, it's not the way I want it to go. This way I want, and you just keep your focus on the intention, and the outcome is literally going to happen. Well, that same structure works in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Things that show up in the body, like a tumor, will have started, not good, bad, right, or wrong, as an idea, and an idea that we just kept deciding on. So it becomes a belief system.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, there it is. And then we develop great fear.
Mm-hmm.
But having a different conversation about that as a starting point for where is it showing up in the body? How are you literally experiencing it?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you ask two diabetics, how do you experience diabetes? Each one of them is going to give you a very, very different answer, a very unique answer. Well, it's going to be the same thing for everything. Everybody's going to have their own experience, and then as they're describing their experience to you, you can pay attention and ask some bigger questions around that, because you're looking to take things that have collapsed in on themselves like a tumor and pull it apart. And the minute the air hits there, can't exist in the same form anymore. So when you change the energetic constructs behind the actual thing that has formed, the thing that has become a thing, when you change the energetics, the form cannot remain the same. It's got to change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beauty of it. That's how it has nothing to do with good, bad, right, or wrong. It had two questions. How does the God force that I am choose to live my life today? Presupposes I'm a God, small g God, big F force.
Mm-hmm.
Choose. I have choice. To live, I live. My life, I have a life. Today, there is today. And then the other main question is, how is this working for me?
Mm-hmm.
And own it. If it's working well, carry on. If it's not, well, then what else is possible here?
Mm-hmm. And often it's a whole body experience too. And I was like also reading about rewiring the brain, how it rewires constantly. So based
Yep.
on listening to this podcast, I've just rewired myself in many ways. And I think we have to be also open to that instead of like blocking it or judging it too much. Being able to change and accepting change, and that's actually very tough for many people. But what a wonderful discussion! Thank you so much, Sheila Winter Wallace. You're a spiritual healer and coach. It's been wonderful talking to you. It's been a learning experience, a rewiring experience for me. And I think what's one thing that's also important here to go with the flow, just to stick with the Hawaiian image too. And I think that's hugely important too. Thank you so much for being on Rasha's World today.
My pleasure. Thank you so very much.